This is NBC Nightly News, Tuesday, September 24th. Reported by John Chancellor with David Brinkley's Journal.
Good evening. It became known today that the new Get Tough policy of the United States toward the countries which have been pushing up the price of oil contains at least the threat of military action from the industrialized world. It's the first major foreign policy initiative of the new administration, and it was unveiled yesterday in speeches by the President and the Secretary of State. The new policy is timed to precede several international economic meetings, including one at Camp David this weekend. And Irving R. Levine has learned the background of the new policy.
The abrupt switch in America's attitude follows an action taken by the oil nations earlier this month, on Friday the 13th. On that day, the oil-producing nations announced a 3.5% tax increase now and a possible 12% price increase in 3 months. Administration sources say that the tougher U.S. attitude formulated by Secretaries Kissinger and Simon also reflects growing desperation in industrialized nations over deficits due to oil prices, and disappointment over a recent Arab decision to pump less oil in order to keep the price up artificially. White House advisors acknowledge that the actions we can take against higher prices are limited, but they add that a war of nerves may be useful. The strategy is to make the Arabs worry that the industrialized world may undertake military action that would deprive them of their wells, or that might draw Russia into the area, a prospect dreaded by Middle East monarchs. So the hope is that rather than run these risks, the oil producers will decide on lower prices, or at least on no further increase, as the most prudent course. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
The reaction to the new American policy was strong among the oil-producing countries. One Arab sheikh said oil prices could come down if the West lowered prices of food and manufactured goods. The Arab League said if the United States wants cooperation, it should use different words. The Oil Producers Association said inflation caused higher oil prices instead of the other way around. And the Saudi Arabian oil minister, Ahmed Zaki Yamani, who's in this country, reacted to the talk of possible military action. Rebecca Bell has that story.
Addressing a group in Chicago, Sheikh Yamani issued a strong warning to those who talk of military intervention to secure their Middle East oil supplies. Yamani was responding to a question about the possibility of European military intervention.
Any military operation directed to these areas will definitely result not in the continuous flow of oil afterward, but in a very severe cut down in production. If any interruption takes place, then the production in the whole world, or at least in the OPEC area, will be cut down to something like half. Then we will be assured of a worldwide depression and the end of this civilization. I think it is a very risky gambling project no one can think of unless he's out of his mind.
Later at a news conference, Yamani reiterated his view that President Ford is seeking a peaceful solution to the world's oil problems.
I think your leaders nowadays are seriously involved in their efforts to bring peace into the area and to use some peaceful measures to achieve world stability rather than military measures.
Yamani concluded with a soft-spoken but firm word of advice to the United States. Do not presume, he said, to tell your friends how they must manage their resources. Rebecca Bell, NBC News, Chicago.
The strongest reaction of all came from the president of Venezuela, who said his country would go on selling its oil in the face of what he called economic totalitarianism in world trade. He compared that to the totalitarianism of Adolf Hitler. Also in the news tonight, some startling details on how poorly the United States protects the nuclear weapons it is storing overseas. We'll have a look at the hearings into Nelson Rockefeller's nomination as vice president, which had some spirited moments today. And from Buffalo, New York, we'll see the first draft debater coming home from a foreign country under President Ford's new clemency program. Those stories and others after this.
NBC Nightly News is brought to you by Exxon.
Let's say this gallon can represents all the products Exxon makes from crude oil and natural gas. Gasoline, heating oil, jet fuel, kerosene, and many more. In the first half of this year, the average amount Exxon received from around the world for each gallon of these petroleum products was 36 cents. Here's what was in that 36 cents for us. Almost 13 cents went to taxes, such as excise, income, and sales taxes. Over 14 cents went for crude oil and refined products. It took 5 cents to operate our refineries, oil fields, and tankers. 2 cents for marketing and general administration. That left a net income of nearly 2.5 cents. A little less than 1 cent of this was distributed to our shareholders. We reinvested the rest, about 1.5 cents, to help finance a $16 billion program to produce more energy. We hope this gives you a better idea of what we do with the money we make from the products we make from crude oil and natural gas.
A possibly controversial question was being asked in Washington today. How safe from theft or destruction are the American nuclear weapons stored in other countries? The staff of the powerful House Appropriations Committee is beginning an investigation into the security of these weapons based on information gathered by Congressman Clarence Long of Maryland. And this afternoon, the Pentagon announced a major revision of the security procedures it has been using to protect the nuclear weapons. Here's more from John Cochran.
NBC News has learned the Pentagon is working on a major program to tighten security over atomic weapons both at home and overseas. Without conceding that the present security system is inadequate, a Pentagon spokesman said late today, there are always things that can be improved. That statement follows charges from Congressman Clarence Long that the Defense Department has failed to correct security deficiencies at many nuclear weapons sites in the U.S., in Europe, and in Asia. Long said congressional investigators, relying in part on classified military information, found that international gangsters could steal American nuclear weapons and blackmail the United States and its allies. Long said U.S. atomic weapons are vulnerable not only to thieves, but to saboteurs.
In one country, there are a whole bunch of quick reaction aircraft stored next to a slum within hand grenade throwing distance, and they don't even dare put the nuclear weapons on the planes because they fear that possibility of a grenade being thrown at it. The Pentagon's aware of this, and yet this is part of the whole picture, I think, of knowing it but not doing anything about it.
Privately, Pentagon officials say there have been no instances where American nuclear weapons have been in dire danger of theft or destruction. But it was learned that the danger was sufficient on some rare occasions for precautionary steps to be taken. Those steps have included removing critical parts from nuclear devices so they cannot be used, and unloading warheads from planes and putting them in safer storage. John Cochran, NBC News, Washington.
The Senate today gave final congressional approval to the biggest defense appropriation bill ever, $82.6 billion. It now goes to President Ford for his signature. It is $4.4 billion less than the president had asked for. The president today named Donald Rumsfeld to replace White House Chief of Staff Alexander Haig, but Rumsfeld will have a different title and not as much power. Mr. Ford today also spoke before a group of police chiefs. Tom Brokaw has more on both stories.
President Ford told the chiefs of police that there are no easy answers to the problems of rising crime rates, but that some priorities must be established. He came down hard on what he called the career criminal, the repeat offender.
We must take the criminal out of circulation. We must make crime hazardous and very costly. We must ensure that swift and prolonged imprisonment will inevitably follow each and every offense.
At the White House, shortly after the speech, the president's new press secretary, former NBC News correspondent Ron Nessen, held his first briefing. Nessen announced that NATO Ambassador Donald Rumsfeld has been appointed to replace Alexander Haig as White House Chief of Staff. Rumsfeld's official title is Assistant to the President to coordinate the White House operations. Under President Ford, that job is not expected to be as powerful as it was when General Haig and H.R. Haldeman filled it, as Chief of Staff for former President Nixon. But Rumsfeld will be an important figure. He didn't give up the NATO ambassadorship to come back to Washington as just a doorkeeper. Tom Brokaw, NBC News at the White House.
Nelson Rockefeller testified for a second day today before the Senate Rules Committee, which is holding confirmation hearings on his nomination to be vice president. Charles Quinn reports.
Rockefeller again supported President Ford's pardon of former President Nixon as an act of conscience, an act of compassion, and an act of courage. And then he went a bit further.
The constitutional process worked, the information was brought out, the president resigned, the president accepted a pardon, which, in my opinion, is tantamount to admitting guilt.
Late in the afternoon came the toughest questioning of the hearing so far. Democratic Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia asked Rockefeller time and again, yes or no, whether he thought the decision to give Nixon the Watergate tapes was in the best interest of the country.
I have to think there was some basis, that there must have been some wisdom somewhere in relation to this that you and I don't know about. Now, when I know about that, then I could tell.
Well,
I just hate to criticize someone in an area as important as this without having given the person the opportunity to say his side.
I'm a great admirer of you and of your record as governor of New York. But I'll say this, you're about the hardest man I've ever seen to pin down.
Despite that, there is little doubt that the committee will vote to confirm Rockefeller as vice president, probably unanimously. Charles Quinn, NBC News, Washington.
The Senate today overwhelmingly passed a bill to get more doctors and dentists to work in areas where there's a shortage of them, rural areas and big city slums. It would provide scholarships for students who agreed to serve in those areas after graduation. It would also give federal aid to medical and dental schools, which set aside 25% of their classroom space to train these volunteers.
Hello, I'm Fernando Lamas. I want to talk to you about a new television series for some people I love very much, children. Although I'm not in the series, I like to tell you about Villa Alegre, which in Spanish means happy village. Now, helping Spanish and English-speaking children live and learn happily together is what Villa Alegre is all about. It's a fun-filled village where stories and songs and adventures give children the opportunity to get to know one another, while friends like El Capitan and El Vendedor help them learn about each other's languages, cultures, and customs, giving children a head start towards developing friendships and respect, especially when brought together in the school environment. So join them this fall on your public broadcasting service channel. There is no happier village in the world like Villa Alegre.
Former President Nixon is receiving treatment in a Long Beach, California hospital today for his phlebitis condition. He's also undergoing a series of tests to find the cause of his illness. 10 rooms of the hospital have been set aside for use by Mr. Nixon, his aides, and security men. And the former president is not eating hospital food. His meals are being brought to him from his home in San Clemente, about 40 miles away. Mr. Nixon's health came up today in Judge John Sirica's chambers in Washington. Carl Stern has a report on that.
Mr. Nixon's lawyer, Herbert Miller, agreed to report on the former president's health by October 3rd. If the former president is well enough to come to Washington, Miller indicated he still might fight the subpoenas on legal grounds. If Mr. Nixon is not well enough to travel, lawyers could question him in California. The former president's name still appeared prominently on the list of possible witnesses made public today by the special prosecutors, and there were indications the Nixon pardon will be a major issue in the trial. The prosecutors requested that prospective jurors be asked if they think the Nixon pardon left the defendants unfairly holding the bag. Defense lawyers filed hundreds of proposed questions, including, do you feel Ford's pardon of Nixon was proper, and do you feel recent accounts of Mr. Nixon's health are contrived in order to avoid testifying in this case? 1,000 persons have been called for jury selection, which begins next Tuesday. Tomorrow, technicians begin installing 200 sets of courtroom earphones for listening to White House tape recordings. Carl Stern, NBC News, Washington.
The Senate Government Operations Committee unanimously approved a bill today which would nullify President Ford's decision to turn over the White House tapes and other papers to former President Nixon. The bill would keep all of the materials in government hands, making them available in legal proceedings, and it would prevent their destruction except with the approval of Congress. Much of the Nixon materials will be used in criminal proceedings. Crime in general seems to be greater these days, and David Brinkley has some thoughts on that. David?
The Nixon administration came in talking law and order, but in its last years, for obvious reasons, it never said much about crime. Well, now, street crime is increasing again rapidly, and so is Washington's verbal war against it. For weeks, Attorney General Saxby has been using the strongest language, saying if crime continues, it'll inundate the country and threaten a police state to control it, that society does not cause crime, criminals cause crime, that two-thirds of it is committed by repeaters who, for one reason or another, are not locked up but set free time after time. And Saxby even raised the specter of armed vigilante groups taking over where law enforcement has failed, and he said signs of it had already appeared. In any case, there is no doubt the criminal justice system is one of government's more notorious failures. Well, now, President Ford has joined this chorus and says he is working on a program to get habitual criminals off the streets and keep them off. The details to come later. The most persuasive answer anyone has offered is to expand the court system to handle the load and to handle it quickly. There is no reason why a person arrested at night can't be tried the next morning rather than months later. The Constitution guarantees an accused person a speedy trial, but seldom does anyone get it. John?
In the Middle East, the Israeli Air Force bombed Palestinian terrorist bases in southern Lebanon today. That apparently was an effort to prevent the terrorists from attacking Israel on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur this Thursday. Last year's Mideast war began on Yom Kippur. President Sadat of Egypt says the Palestinians will have their own state in whatever parts of Palestine that the Israelis give up. Israel and Jordan both oppose that. Sadat said this in an interview with Barbara Walters, which will be broadcast tomorrow on the Today program. Here is part of that interview.
We have taken a decision in the Arab Summit saying that the Palestinians will be responsible after any part of Palestine that will be liberated. So the Palestinians will be responsible. And King Hussein, from what I know, he knows this quite well also.
Again, the Israelis say that a separate Palestinian state between them and Jordan would be economically unsound, there would be no seaport, and that it would be psychologically wrong, and that the Palestinians would not live in peace, but would then try to take more of Israel.
This is very funny. Why? Because Israel is a threat to 100 million Arabs now. Not the Palestinians will be the threat to Israel. And why should the Israelis are trying now to make a map for the Middle East? Why shouldn't they drop this and give the Palestinians the right to have their land on the Western Bank and on the Gaza Strip and have their state there and so?
The Greek Communist Party is a legal political movement today for the first time in 38 years. That was a step toward free elections and might eventually lead to some form of amnesty for the 80,000 Greeks who fled the country after the 1947 insurrection. In Washington, the House of Representatives voted 307 to 90 today to cut off all American military aid to Turkey until President Ford certifies that substantial progress has been made toward a settlement on Cyprus.
Over the next 4 years, Exxon plans a record capital spending program of more than $16 billion to find more energy and to get this energy to work for its customers. In the U.S. and around the world, Exxon will be searching for new reserves of oil and natural gas. To move this energy, Exxon plans a sizable investment in supertankers and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. At the same time, we'll be supplying nuclear fuel and working to develop ways to turn America's abundant coal reserves into synthetic gas. We also plan to expand our refineries and chemical plants to help meet today's increased demand. $16 billion. That's what Exxon plans to spend finding more energy and getting it to its customers.
The 50 biggest utility companies in the United States raised their prices by an average of more than 55% in the first half of the year, according to a report out today. The report came from an official of the National Utilities Service, which monitors utility costs worldwide. The official called on the companies to absorb more cost increases than they do. The sharply rising price of propane gas came under examination today as a House committee began investigating charges that the major oil companies made windfall profits under Federal Energy Office policies. Robert Goralski has that story.
Committee Chairman Charles Dingell said it was scandalous that propane prices climbed 330% during the energy crisis. Witnesses claimed even though propane was available in adequate supply, even exported, Americans kept paying inflated prices.
I am personally deeply angry and frustrated when I consider the fact that rural, poor families of my state were paying up to 40% more of their net income last winter just to stay warm. When I consider the fact that independent chicken growers in my state have to operate at a loss or even go out of business due to high propane prices.
In the case of the Federal Energy Office under the administration of William Simon, I believe that there was widespread conflict of interest. I believe that decisions were made at the highest levels which benefited major oil companies and which cost the American consumer billions.
I'm aware that we're not fully able to protect ourselves from the Arabs, but I'm becoming aware of the fact that we're not even able to protect ourselves from those who are supposed to protect us from the oil companies.
Members of the committee are convinced that if errors of judgment were made at the height of the energy crisis, the oil companies benefited from them. What is deep in their concern is that the Energy Administration is not cooperating with the committee in its request for documents relating to those decisions, how they were made and who made them. Robert Goralski, NBC News, Washington.
There was no response today to the charges from the producers of propane gas. The Tennessee Valley Authority, which supplies electricity to almost 2.5 million customers in 7 states, called today for a voluntary 20% cutback in electricity use by its customers. The TVA said it faces a power shortage this winter because of low coal supplies and said if people don't cut power use voluntarily, it may have to ration electricity. In the Midwest today, there was an early frost, and it damaged crops already hurt by drought and then too much rain. Illinois corn is one of the crops. The president of the Farm Bureau said that instead of going into the general market, this corn will have to be sold for feed. He added that it won't be very good feed either. The soybean crop was hurt as well. One Illinois farmer said there are thousands of acres around here that aren't worth a thing. He said it's worse than all these guys are saying. 4-year-old Allison Meacham was found unharmed today in a motel near her home outside Cincinnati. The daughter of Charles Meacham, chairman of the Taft Broadcasting Company, was kidnapped yesterday. Her kidnapper, who is still at large, asked for only $2,000 ransom. On Wall Street, stock prices dropped again. Today, the Dow Jones Industrial Averages fell almost 10 points in heavy trading.
Today, Exxon is concentrating on finding more energy and getting it to work for you. But someday, the conventional energy sources we depend on will be exhausted. So we are studying something called nuclear fusion, the same energy process which feeds the fires of the sun. Here in this laboratory at the University of Rochester, Exxon is participating in a project to create controlled nuclear fusion on Earth. These scientists are using a series of powerful lasers as a gigantic match to burn or fuse the nuclei of atoms inside this metal chamber. For 1/10 of a second, this laser equipment can focus more power than could all the electric generators in the United States. Commercial power from nuclear fusion may be decades away. But if fusion power can ever be harnessed, we may one day have an almost limitless supply of sun-like energy right here on Earth.
Here's the latest on the Vietnam clemency program. So far, 20 deserters have received undesirable discharges, and another 136 deserters are being processed. Authorities say very few of them, these men, turned themselves in voluntarily. Most are men who had been arrested by military police. A young man who had evaded the draft and the war for many years traveled today from Waterloo, Ontario to Buffalo, New York. He's the first man in that category of the clemency program to come home from a foreign country. Jack Paxton made the journey with him.
7 years and 1 day after Myron Ostapchuk fled to Canada to avoid the draft, he packed to go home to Buffalo. Ostapchuk, 28, and his wife Carol lived in Waterloo, Ontario, while he got a master's degree in Slavic languages. Ostapchuk had wanted to come home for a long time, but was afraid of what might happen to him. President Ford's clemency plan made up his mind for him. But even at this late date, he had a hard time getting used to the idea.
It's weird, you know. After 7 years of leaving. I don't believe it.
I won't believe it till you and I both set foot on the same ground at the same time.
2 hour ride.
For me, I can say it's only 100 miles. For you, it's like 5,000 miles because you haven't been able to go.
Yeah.
During that day we went to Niagara Falls and you were standing there and said how upset you were because you could throw a rock across the water and yet you couldn't go across. Do you remember that?
I wonder what's going to happen when we're right there, you know, just before we cross. I can just...
You're going to faint.
Probably. Goodbye, Waterloo.
Hello, Buffalo. I'm asking you how
All Ostapchuk had to do to cross the border was prove his American citizenship and convince guards he had no illegal goods.
carrying anything with you to declare?
No, basically everything is from the States when I left.
The Ostapchuks were met at the border by his sister and brother-in-law. He has 2 weeks before he must report to the U.S. attorney. He feels he's done nothing wrong, feels he deserves total amnesty, but he says he'll do whatever he's told to clear his record with the government.
The authorities have some latitude. They may grant less than 2 years public service if they wish. What happens to Ostapchuk and the few others who've turned themselves in may help determine whether thousands of other draft resistors in exile decide to come home. Jack Paxton, NBC News, on the Canadian border.
And good night for NBC News.
NBC Nightly News has been brought to you by Exxon.
Someone or something is stalking these people, and no one believes them. Robert Stack, Vera Miles. The strange and deadly occurrence. Tonight at 8:30, 7:30 Central. Will someone believe them, or is it too late?
The Scene at 6 is next on Channel 4, WSM-TV, Nashville.
Don't you get tired of eating lunch at a food factory?
Mississippi number 7 coming up.
Could I have a little ketchup, please?